Welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Susan McNeil and I am one of the managers on the implementation science team at RNAO, and I'm moderating the session today. I'd also like to introduce you to Andrea Stubbs. Andrea is the project lead for the Best Practice Champions program, and she's online to help anyone who has any technical questions in relation to today's webinar. And our monthly webinars, these are meant for you, RNAO Best Practice Champions, to help you in your work with guideline implementation. And speakers for this series include champions and members of BPSO teams who are actively involved in best practice guideline implementation. And we'll be mentioning the BPSO program a little today, so in case you aren't familiar, BPSO stands for Best Practice Spotlight Organization. And BPSOs are healthcare and academic organizations selected by RNAO through a request for proposal process to implement and evaluate the RNAO's best practice guidelines. And it's a dynamic partnership that focuses on making a positive impact on patient care through the use of evidence-based practice. And RNAO provides support to BPSOs that have formally agreed to implement and evaluate multiple guidelines over a 3-year period. So today we have a presentation by Susan Lang from Quinte Healthcare, which is one of our BPSOs, and her presentation is called The Resilient Change Agent, 10 Steps to Thrive as a System Transformer. And just before I hand things over to Susan, I'd like to mention a couple things. So we're expecting a lot of you on the line today. There's been great interest in this webinar, and let's make this webinar really interactive and engaging for everyone. So please comment in the chat box throughout Susan's presentation. You can type your comments and questions in the chat box using all panelists and all attendees so that everyone can see what you have to say. And we'll also have 10 minutes of questions and answers at the end of Susan's presentation, so do post your questions in the chat box. And we are recording this presentation today and posting the slides on our website. And this way you can review it again or share it with your colleagues. And so now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Susan Lang. And Susan Lang is currently the Manager of Organizational Development at Quinte Healthcare, which is a 4-hospital system located in Eastern Ontario. So Susan has 2 decades of experience working in several Ontario hospitals as an organizational development leader, and as a consultant supporting leadership and team development, education, talent management, and change management. Susan is multi-certified in a variety of coaching, training, and development methodologies, including LEADS, DIC, SC, and narrative coaching. And she builds her own resiliency through her mindfulness practice, art making, and time in nature. So for now, I'd like to open the floor to Susan and welcome and thank you for being with us today, Susan.
Thank you so very much, Susan and Andrea. I really appreciate being here. I just want to make sure I'm going to be able to advance those slides. So I might need, Andrea, for you to advance the slides for me, if you would. So perfect. So thank you very much.
Sorry, you're doing it, Susan, so you can do it again.
You think
yeah, you're fine. Just make sure you left click instead of right click.
Okay. I see it there. Okay. I think I see it there. Okay, so again, thank you. And technology always gets change agents. There's no question about it. Okay, so now we've gotten very small slides. Andrea, how about I just have you manage the technology? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect, thank you. Even if we did a dry run, it's not cooperating at my end. I apologize for that. Perfect, I'll just let you know that's a great slide for us to start on. So I hope everyone's having a great summer, and it's amazing how many people are here and are interested in this topic, but it's really not that much of a surprise when you think about it, because healthcare. What is more relevant to us in these days of massive transformation than change and resiliency? So I think those 2 key words are essential to us as we're trying to move forward with this transformation agenda and keep ourselves sane at the same time. So someone had asked about the slides, and yes, as you know, they're going to be available, but if you've got a pencil and paper or a pen and paper handy, that would be helpful through the course of this, because we will be doing a quick self-assessment at one point, so you might want to jot some things down as we move forward. So next slide. Perfect, thank you. So why resiliency? I think all of us who were involved in the BPSO project have gone through the really excellent change management training that the RNAO provides, and I have been involved in change management for many years and still found it really, really refreshing and helpful. And even with training, the fact of the matter is this is tough, tough work. Supporting people to change their behaviors, to change their attitudes, can sometimes lead us to despair. It is very tough work. So the trick is, how can we stay in the long game of healthcare transformation when there is so much going on and there's so much variation to the journey even on a daily basis. So we're going to look at a few things related to that today. So next slide. So what is resiliency? And you can bring that whole slide in if you want, Andrea, thank you. So we're hearing a lot about resiliency in these days. It's kind of a buzzword, and in a nutshell, we're talking about a proactive approach to dealing with the work of creating change without succumbing to things like change fatigue, compassion fatigue, and burnout, other words that we're very familiar with in the healthcare space. So, you know, resiliency at the heart of it is about being able to bounce back, to be able to stand the buffeting, and be able to return to center despite external situations and external pressures. And social science and neuroscience these days is spending a lot of energy thinking about this issue as the world becomes more complex. And some of the things that we now know through this research is that resiliency is how we recharge, not how we endure. And we need to find a way to sort of refresh ourselves, and we'll be talking about that. And it's also a lot to do with mindset. Resiliency is very much about how we frame the story of change and how we understand our role in change and how we support those who are trying to change to understand their role in change. So there's a mindset piece to this. And at the heart of it, you know, resiliency is not only the foundation to successful change, because we have to do the work of it, but it's absolutely the foundation to our own health and wellness. So if we can advance the slide. So I'm noticing, Andrea, some people are struggling with seeing the slides as blurry. I don't know if there's anything.
I see that too. Unfortunately, we can't change anything about that right now, but we will be archiving these, so if that helps other people.
Okay, okay.
Just try that. I'm not sure if this helps anyone.
Well, it's bigger.
That does look better, Andrea. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Great. So on this slide, what I want you to do, participants, is just take a moment to reflect on this notion of being resilient and think about a time when you have been resilient in your life. And it might be in your workplace as a BPSO champion, or it might be in your personal life. I'm not looking for your story. What I'm interested in is the keywords that describe how you felt or behaved when you were in that resilient mindset. What does resiliency mean? So let's just take a moment, and people can feel free to kind of throw in some ideas. Insightful, cautious. Positive attitude, supported, open-minded. Great, determined, solution-focused, strong. Yeah, look at everybody's like piling those in now. Great. Meeting peers halfway, empowered, confident, optimistic, calm, fabulous. Keep them coming. I think this will be part of what is archived for us. So it's really helpful to see how other people feel in this kind of place, because there's a way it can sometimes, when we're not feeling resilient, finding resiliency can feel a bit like the Holy Grail, and we'll never get there. But knowing how other people respond in their resilient place can be very helpful. Committed to the importance of pausing. Yeah, brave. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, and feel free to keep putting those ideas in. And so clearly some of those ideas will align with this piece that we're going to talk about now. This is a really powerful framework that I want to share with you called Firma. And Firma is an acronym that stands for the keywords in these 6 boxes. And this is a framework that's gaining a lot of interest in the research world these days. It's been around for a little while. Martin Siegelman is an American psychologist and author. He's from the University of Pennsylvania, and he is someone who has spent his life influencing how we understand wellness and resiliency by studying those who are well and resilient rather than studying the disease side of it. And so this framework is a really helpful marker or a pointer, I guess, for us to start looking at how we are managing in terms of our wellness. So what I'd like you to do as I review these 6 elements is grab that pencil and paper, and I want you to give yourself a rating. So no shame, no blame. It's a rating system. You're not going to be sharing your bottom line results with anyone. But I want you to consider whether, as we go through this, you'd give yourself an A, B, C, or F in these elements. So Andrea, if you can change the slide for me. Perfect. So the first one is balancing act. So this is the idea of being realistically optimistic or positive, but not naive or Pollyanna-ish. So I want you to consider the following pieces. And Andrea, if you can hit the slide again. Perfect. I want you to consider these elements. I'm realistically optimistic about my own capabilities and limitations. I'm good at looking at situations in different ways to find something positive. And when I feel positive, negative emotions, I can take action to respond to what's causing them. Only 3 bullet points. We could say a lot more about this, but based on that little bit, how do you rate yourself? A, B, C, or F in terms of positive emotion? So next slide. And you can pop that in again as well. So you can just jot this down on your, on your pen and paper, and then we'll do a bit of a debrief after. So engagement, and another way this model thinks about engagement is something that we might consider as presence. Okay, so exercising effective choice, being involved in things that you find interesting and meaningful, and being able to bring yourself back to a present awareness, not getting lost. So I focus on things I can control or influence rather than those things I can't impact. I can come back to the now rather than getting stuck in the past or the future. And I engage in activities that I feel are personally meaningful. So again, A, B, C, or F. Great. And you can pop that in again as well. Thank you. So relationships. The third element of the model, we're hardwired for relationships, and depending on how you frame your relationship net is completely individual, of course, but we all need some kind of web of connection. So the model asks us to consider, I share my feelings and concerns with people that I trust. I find it easy to ask for and accept help from others. I express my emotions in a way that others can understand and accept. Again, very quick 3-point consideration of that massive realm of relationships. But is it A, B, C, or F for you? Next slide. Great, thank you. So meaning. Meaning is related to direction, it's related to values, and the model in some cases, the way it's described and worked with, considers meaning actually the foundational piece of all of them. The idea here is that the stronger our connection with our own deep-seated meaning, however we define it, the more likely we are to bounce back from setbacks. So consider, I'm clear about my own direction and goals. There are significant people, animals, causes, ideas, beliefs in my life that give it structure. And my actions and decisions are actually led by or highly influenced by my values. So A, B, C, or F. Next one. So the idea of accomplishment here, some research that's come out of this and is aligned to this thinks of this as grit. So there's some great work on grittiness out there. So seeing things through to completion even when they get tough is what this is about. So I believe that I have the confidence to solve the challenges in my life. I draw strength and confidence from having already overcome things previously in the past. I move into action rather than staying stuck in either planning or analysis paralysis. So I'm able to move forward into the action phase. So A, B, C, or F. And the final piece of this 6-piece framework is the idea of health. So it's looking after yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, however you define that, as a way to respond to stress. So I want to make a point here that this isn't that you are healthy. A person who has chronic disease or is terminally ill could actually score themselves very high in the health component of the resiliency framework. It's about how you tend to yourself. So I eat a healthy diet. I make time for myself every week, so routinely, to do things that feel good. And my intake of substances doesn't increase when I'm stressed. So A, B, C, or F. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So here's the thing, friends. You might find, oh my gosh, I actually am not doing as well as I hoped. Or you might be pleasantly surprised when you break it down in that way to understand that you actually have some great pillars in place. So feel free to share in the chat box just your general impression. Were you surprised? Are you pleased? Is it like, oh wow, I'm really low in some areas? So feel free to put that into the chat box so we can get a sense of how people in our network are doing in terms of their self-assessment of resiliency and wellness. Someone's saying that they're feeling reassured. That's great. Not too bad. Good stuff. A's and B's. Yay, Abigail. Good. B average. I'm pleased with what I'm doing, but there's always room to improve. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want you to realize that this is an opportunity to express resiliency right in this moment, because if you are disappointed or you feel like there's space to move, that you need to use some compassion for yourself. Very important that you do that. You might have scored lower than you wanted. When I first did this assessment, I was actually in the tank on the health and wellness one. Not that there was anything wrong with me, but I really was neglecting my self-care. And it was part of a series of wake-up calls that shook me into action. And I was able to make some big changes. So if I retest myself now on this framework, I'm actually in a really great place. So let it be fodder for action, and consider how you can move that forward. And we'll be doing some action planning towards the end of the session. So you'll be able to kind of action this immediately. Not surprised, but always room to improve. Okay, great. So let's go to the next slide. So the 6 elements of PERMA relate to that personal side of the puzzle, which is very important. I mean, we are the tool of the work that we do. And I want to share with you 4 other pieces of the puzzle which are related to mindset and how we frame and reframe our understanding of both ourselves as change agents and the nature of change in and of itself. And these are things that you can use with those that you're trying to encourage and inspire and champion to change, as well as keeping yourself on track. So next slide. Okay, so first truth about change is that we live in a VUCA world. So VUCA was an acronym that was coined during the Cold War when things were so simple. And it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So it's a VUCA world, baby. And healthcare, more than any sector right now, is undergoing constant change. So I sometimes hear people say, when are we going to stop this? When's the change going to end? Are we ever going to get there? Are we ever going to arrive? Can we have a break? Can we slow this down? And the fact of the matter is, the answers to all those questions are probably no. We are not really going to be able to slow this train down. We have to learn to ride it as effectively as we can. So helping people understand that change is ongoing in our sector is, I think, a good reframe. And the other thing that I think is really helpful is to help people remember that they're masterful change agents. If they're still alive on the planet, if they're thriving adults in some way, shape, or form, if they're working in a healthcare career, they have been learning and changing since the moment of conception. And so we think we're not good change agents, but we're actually incredibly resilient as individuals and as a species. So helping people remember that they've been learning all their lives is a way to sometimes diminish the anxiety. So next slide. So the second piece here is that you really only control one thing, and this comes at you, change agent, as well as those who you're trying to change. And you know, in healthcare, we really want to take care of people, and we want to do a really good job and support our patients and our families and our staff and support the sector. And really, we need to understand that we control ourselves, and that's it. We control ourselves. Our circle of control is what we say, what we do, and how we act, and how we show up for people. Whether you're a CEO or whether you're me, you only control those 3 things. We all also have a circle of influence, and that's where things get really exciting, because depending on who we know, like, and trust, our skill set, where we choose to be, where opportunity takes us, we can have huge impact. And still, with those 2 pieces of real estate, there's a massive amount that's outside of our control or influence. And you'll find that the people that you're trying to change and yourself can sometimes get caught in worrying about what's the government of the day doing? What's our funding look like? What's happening with that person over there? Those things are really outside your control or influence. So helping people come back to where they can actually impact and have leverage is incredibly helpful to prevent, you know, disappointment and frustration and intolerance and the disappointment and burnout and martyrdom that can come for those of us who are desperately trying to make change but not focused in the right place. So a question you can ask yourself, or that you can pose to the people you're trying to support, is what can you do right now to move towards the vision of what you want? It might be a very small thing, but help them find their control and influence and get them off worrying about what everybody else is doing outside their control and influence. Next slide, please. So number 3 is perfectionism myth, go for 17, not 21. I learned this from a colleague of mine, and we have integrated it into our leads training. So you may know the game of blackjack. If there's any card players out there, a perfect hand in the game of blackjack is 21. But professional card players know that you want to shoot for 17 in your hand, and that is the best strategy to beat the dealer's hand. Going for perfection, there is no such thing as perfection. There's only continuous improvement. And it's such a difficult place to hit. So this is pointing to managing our expectations and focusing on incremental improvement, seeing how this is a really long game, a marathon, not a sprint. And if someone is disappointed that something happened or didn't happen, help them reframe it as learning. Because the trick here is to keep moving, 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 moving. It's not about arriving, okay? So again, it's pulled me out of the depths of despair more than once. Next slide. As change agents, we really need to be able to look at things from multiple perspectives, shifting our gaze again and again and again. So this analogy is really helpful in that what it's suggesting is that, you know, if you're on the dance floor and you're grinding it out with 400 of your best friends and it's crowded and it's noisy, you're going to have a very specific view of the nightclub. Kind of like our frontline workers, very much in the experience of the movement. And if you and I travel to the third balcony and look at that nightclub from that vantage point, what we're going to see is a different picture. It's not a better picture or worse picture, but it gives us new information about what's going on. And so I think it's a great analogy because what it helps us do, it helps us remember that we need to see both the micro and the macro of change. And that people who are at the front line of our care system are often very much in, we say in the weeds, and that's got almost a pejorative kind of sense, but they're in the moment with those who they're caring for. And we as change agents sometimes need to say, hey, do you know what I see from the balcony? I see a different kind of picture. And it helps when people get disappointed to remind them of that larger picture and to help them see the system that we're trying to transform instead of the immediate disappointment that's kind of right there for them in that moment. So there might be an outbreak on a unit and perhaps someone is thinking, oh man, I thought we got this nailed. I can't believe we've got this outbreak. And if you remind them of maybe what's going on in other places in the hospital or what's happening in the community or how there's been a long stretch of time between outbreaks and that there was a time when we were always in outbreak, that those are the kinds of things that you from the third balcony can see. And it really does help keep people focused on what matters to them, but also holds another perspective. So really very helpful in terms of being able to move from perspective. So ask yourself if you start to feel stuck in your perspective, what's another way to see this? Do I need to look closer or do I need to pull the lens back and take a bigger picture view? So next slide. So that really is sort of the 10 points. What we've been looking at and talking about here are the 6 elements of personal resiliency or personal wellness, because you are the tool of the change you're trying to make, and we need you to stay in the game. And 4 ways you can rethink or reframe the very long game and the very ongoing reality of change in our sector. So can you hit the slide one more time, Andrea? Thank you. So what I want to do is I want you to grab that pencil and paper again, if you've got one, and I want you to do a 3-2-1 action plan. So it's a down and dirty, very simple little action plan that let's frame it in the next week. So in the next week, consider and commit to 3 things that you will do differently. 2 things that you will teach or share, and 1 thing that you want to learn more about. Okay, so just take a moment and do that. Because if this is an event that you walk away from and think, oh, well, that was an interesting way to spend 45 minutes, but it doesn't change your practice, or it doesn't touch your impact on other people, then it hasn't had the impact that we're hoping it will. So how can you use this in your practice as a change agent? So with that, we can go to the next slide and open it for any questions or discussion. Glad to begin the conversation with you.
Susan, just while the comments and questions are going into the chat box, I just want to thank you so much for, this was a very practical and highly relevant presentation. And I really like how you've walked us through the PERMA framework, because that is something very, very tangible that I think all of us can spend more time reflecting on. And just the reality that the VUCA, and then taking a step back and recognizing, kind of seeing the big picture, keeping things into perspective. So really excellent. And just one of my questions, and then I'm seeing some other questions starting to come up too, is, are there any books that you recommend on this topic for further learning, or any particular authors that come to mind? Or if not, we could always think about those after.
Wow. You know what? I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. Siegelman has some great stuff. That book.
Sorry?
Pardon me?
Did you say Singleman?
No, it's Siegelman, Martin Siegelman. So the person who coined the framework. I'm just looking over here at my shelves.
Someone's recommending William Bridges' Managing Transitions.
Absolutely. Anything around change management. Self-coaching. There's some great self-coaching books out there. I can share some with the group after the fact.
Sure.
Brene Brown. Maybe there's, if the participants have any ideas, please feel free to throw those names in.
Great. There's a question here that I'll read out. Would you be able to apply a scenario in which the framework is applied to change? It would be good to help conceptualize how it is implemented in practice. Does anything come to mind?
The PERMA framework?
Yeah, I think that's what someone is probably referring to.
Well, the PERMA framework is really for us to use as individuals. So, asking ourselves if we have, meaning, if what we're doing has purpose for us. Considering if we can be at least cautiously optimistic with the future, connecting with people and engaging with those ideas, not getting stuck. So in the past and future, owning our accomplishments and seeing what we've done, instead of constantly, trying to chase the carrot that we can never reach, and taking care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. I think that applying the framework, and I mentioned that I had a sort of an aha moment. I had, I had scored well in all of those elements but health. And that was the one thing that was pulling me down, and I realized what I needed to do was a simple thing, but I needed to manage my weight in a different way, and I ended up losing a significant amount of weight. And it's interesting, you wouldn't think that would help me be a better change agent or help me be a more effective leader, but in every way, shape, and form it did, because it changed so much of my interior world, so as well as my energy. So I think it's really about noticing where you need to pay more attention to yourself.
Great, thank you. Sort of a related question is, how can I encourage my teammates to take care of themselves better? So you talked about taking care of your own self. Mm-hmm. Any suggestions there?
You know what? I think modeling is always good. So sometimes we can be leaders and we can be preaching something that we're not practicing. So there's something about leading through action that's very important here. I think acknowledging that it's difficult and acknowledging that none of us are, that we all get stressed and we all get overwhelmed at times. So There's no, again, shame and blame in this. It's about how we can get better. I think compassionately caring about someone, saying, hey, you seem like you're a little bit fried these days. Why don't you look at the slides that I got from this great webinar I went to and consider how you score out on these 6 elements? I mean, this information is publicly available. So I think that's, modeling, walking compassionately beside someone and giving them some tools to help reframe and think about what's going on.
Great, thank you. And lots of thank yous in the chat box, and also a couple of recommendations for other books. Grit by Angela Duckworth, Principles by Ray Dalio. So people, if you people on the line, if you have any other recommendations, please put them in the chat. What about just a little bit more, someone saying, I don't have time to practice becoming more resilient. Is it really that important? Maybe a little bit more of an urge to recognize the value of it. Is there anything more that you wanted to say, or perhaps some participants might also be able to respond to that as well?
Yeah, you know what? I think that this kind of framework can feel overwhelming, or this kind of, these ideas, it's like, oh my gosh, now I've got to take care of myself, and I am not supposed to have a glass of red wine at night, and I have to, make friends, and no. It's about asking yourself, what's one small thing that will make me feel better? Many of us in healthcare we're powerful, strong, driven, highly committed people, and that eventually dries up. That eventually becomes a dry well, and that is an absolute path to burnout. So it's really about, how can I do one thing that will ease the pressure on myself physically and psychologically, and how can I think about this very much as not mine to solve, not mine to fix, not mine to conquer, but mine to contribute to. Our grandkids will be working on some of these problems. And so how do I just continue to do the work I'm doing in a way that's the most effective? So I think it's about breaking it down and taking a bite of the elephant, not worrying about trying to become a superstar, resilient creature. None of it there.
Thank you. The chat box is nice and active. I'll see if we can squeeze in a couple more questions. One from a nursing student who's graduating in a year and has noticed a lot of burnout. So what would you suggest as a soon-to-be new graduate and a mom to not experience burnout and be resilient to all the changes that are going on in healthcare? So there's that question, and then also a question about, and I can repeat this if you need it again, but a relation between this and system transformation, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, they're both great directions to go in. So I don't see the name of the person who is the soon-to-be graduated nurse and mom, but yay and thank you. Natasha, thank you on behalf of all of us, because the next generation is so important in terms of what we're trying to do. And I'm glad you're paying attention to this and thinking about this now at your career stage, as opposed to when you start to feel the effects. I think you just need to know that you can do what you can do. So I would suggest control and influence is one thing that I would say a new nurse can pay attention to. You're learning. You're going to be green. You're going to be asked to do a whole bunch of things you're not very good at. You'll be novice, and that's expected, and that's okay. But how can you make a difference for your patients? How can you make a difference for your peers to the extent that you can, and not ask more of yourself than is feasible? And take care of your family and take care of yourself as well, because again, you're going to have a really long career, So it's a marathon. It's a marathon. And in terms of systems transformation, this is essential. I mean, we think of systems and systems transformation as kind of something that's happening out there. It's humans. It's complex collections of humans making and creating rules and regulations and creating actions. That's what our system is. So our resiliency and our ability to care for ourselves and pay attention to the needs of others, not just our patients, but you know, our peers, and being able to communicate effectively and all those kinds of things, is the heart of systems transformation. We are the transformation. We are the transformation. And so this is completely essential to what we're talking about in terms of that, you know, that construct of systems.
Great, thank you. There's a note here, and I think it's talking, so I'll read it. I attended a conflict and anger management course, as sometimes change is muddled with other emotions, and I would agree. I found it was far better post this course, as it eased the pressure and the mental anguish with dealing with negative people whose lives and output could not change. So I think what Misha's saying is that recommending conflict and anger management perhaps is an additional skill to build.
Well, I would fully agree with that. I think that, you know, our emotional intelligence and our ability to manage ourselves in difficult situations and have quote unquote crucial or courageous conversations is essential. And that's a skill. And that takes some practice and some, you know, very good techniques. There's many good courses. And I think that that's essential. Without a doubt, to being able to keep all of this in perspective and be effective even under stress, which is what VUCA is.
Great, yeah. So there are a couple of other postings. There's a nursesunion.ca stress, and which I believe has a link to a survey on stress, and it talks about resilient skills. So that's a great resource, kind of follow up to this conversation. So excellent. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your additional ideas. That just augments the learning for everyone. Maybe, oh, was there a comment there?
No, that was just me saying I'm really glad to see the link. That's great.
Great. Well, I think that we probably should wrap up now, Susan, and just echoing all of the comments in the chat box about how thankful people are and how useful this content has been. The great participation from everyone. So after this, you'll be receiving a link to an online survey to evaluate today's presentation, and you can make suggestions for further information on sharing topics, and then once you've completed the evaluation, you'll receive your certificate of attendance. So once again, thank you so much, Susan, for this excellent presentation. It was really outstanding. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and I wish you all a great afternoon.
Perfect, thank you. Have a great day, guys.